During the last century, many governments forcibly removed Indigenous children from their families and sent them to residential schools to be educated. These were horrific institutions of abuse, and many children never returned home. Last year, a mass grave was identified on the grounds of a residential school in British Columbia, where as many as 215 children lie. It was a truth that many Canadians could not run from, and we had to start listening to the people that survived. My next guest is Vanessa Genier, an Indigenous mother from the Missanabie First Nations in Ontario. She started a Facebook group asking other quilters to make quilt blocks that she would sew into quilts to honor residential school survivors. It started small, but quickly expanded into a community of teaching and sharing. So please, grab your sewing and a cup of tea, and here is my interview with Vanessa Genier. Welcome, Vanessa, to the show. Now, you're coming to us from Timmins, Ontario, right?
Yes.
And are you originally from Timmins?
No, I was born in Leaf Rapids, Manitoba, which is a small community up in northern Manitoba, a little mining community. So I lived there for 5 years. I grew up in Red Lake, which is northwest Ontario, close to Manitoba border. And I've lived up on a northern reserve where my first husband was from. So I lived on Weagama Lake, which is North Caribou Lake First Nation. And then I moved to Timmins when I was 26. So I've been here, oh my gosh, a long time. 20 years.
So at what point did you come to quilting?
When I was 9 years old, my brother had broken his leg, lived in Red Lake. The hospital there couldn't fix his leg. It had been broken so severe. So they shipped him to Winnipeg. So my mom had to go because he was only 10 or 11 at the time. We were left with my dad, who worked shift work. And we had a neighbor, Armand, and she made quilts that I believe belong in museums. They were just amazing. Her house had quilt stuff everywhere. She had these beautiful quilts on her walls and on her bed. So she was babysitting us. And I said, "Can I make one? Can you teach me how to do that?" And she said, "No." I'm like, "Come on, I really want to learn." She's like, "You won't finish it. You'll get started and you won't finish it." I said, "Yes, I will. I will. I promise. I will finish it." And if you know me, I'm a very determined person. So she gave me all her scraps, which I thought was kind of, being a 9-year-old kid, I was like, "I want the pretty stuff over there." But she gave me all her scraps, and I made a cute little blanket. I had to cut it all out with scissors, draw it. I used a little ice cream container and plastic lid, cut out my little squares. And then once I had a pile, then she helped me make, it's called Around the World. And I made that pattern with all the blocks that I had. And then it was all hand stitched. I had to sew my, draw my line for my 1/4 inch. And she helped me finish it. And it was this cute little blanket. And that was how I came to love sewing and quilting. And then it just took off from there. So then when I was 15, my parents bought me a little sewing machine, just a basic one. And I used that for 20 years or something like that. And I just tried everything. And I'm mostly self-taught. And I love patterns because it's just easier for me. I'd rather spend time making the quilt than trying to figure out how to, what size should this block be? This one behind me is my first original design, one that I made myself. But that's what I do. And all my kids have quilts. My parents, anybody and everybody I come in contact with, I'll be like, "Oh, you're getting married? Do you want a quilt? Are you having a baby? I'll make you a quilt. You just got a dog? Oh, I'll make you a quilt with dogs on it," or whatever. I can't draw to save my life. Painting. My kids can do all these things. I'm not musically talented. I can sing off key very well. So quilting is really my niche, and it was my passion. I love quilting, and now it's become my full-time job, which is such a blessing.
Did your mother do any handcrafts, or your aunties or your grandmothers?
My mom and my grandmother both crocheted and knitted, so we got lots of knit afghans and hats and mitts and socks and scarves and all kinds of stuff like that, pillows. My mom she sews now, but we didn't grow up with sewing and fabric. Some of my aunts are artists, they're painters, and they're musicians and things like that. Lots of baking, lots of cooking, lots of canning, those kind of things too. And gardeners, my goodness, they had like 3 or 4 gardens. And I have to go out there and help her pick the tomatoes and go pick strawberries, but don't eat any.
Now, you have a very short season in the north, though.
Yes. my grandfather, they worked hard on his garden, and they were out there every day.
For the people that don't know, could you just explain what the residential school system was?
So think of a boarding school. You send your kid off to school, they stay there. For whatever reason, you need them to be able to stay there and live there, and you go see them. And they enjoy it. It's a great academic school. Now take all that away and your kids just go there. You don't have a say. It was so they just, came to the First Nations, took the kids, put them in these schools. They were run by churches mostly, and the kids were just left there. And you weren't allowed to visit, partly because you're in an isolated community. They've put your children at least 100 kilometers away from your community, so you cannot walk there. They were purposely positioned where it was hard for their families to come and see them. And now everything that your child has learned up to whatever age, because they've taken them as young as 4. And I think there was one lady who said she went even younger, and they were surprised that she was so young. And they've taken them until they're, of age, I guess, 16, or until they run away. And they take these kids, they put them in these homes, and some of those kids never made home. So those parents never got to see their kids. They didn't know what happened to them. And it wasn't a great education system. It was hard. There was a lot of abuse, whether it was sexual or physical or mental or emotional. Think of your heritage and what nationality you are, what cultures you have, where you're from, and then be told that that's not acceptable, that you're a savage, that's the devil's language, that's the devil's traditions, and all these things that you were taught growing up that was just the way of life. That language was the way of life. Those things that you did, that's part of who you are. Like quilting for me now is part of who I am. I can't imagine being told I can't do that anymore because it's wrong. And then that just being those parents who didn't get to see their kids anymore. We know that there was kids that had died, whether it was from abuse or from neglect or from disease. There was a lot of disease too in those schools as well, because they didn't have proper hygiene and proper medical care for those children. So that's in a nutshell. I told my kids, because these kids went to school without their parents, and at the schools they got boo-boos, and now we're making quilts for them. And they only took Indigenous kids.
Yes.
They didn't take, other children. They only took Indigenous children, whether they were First Nation, Métis, or Inuit. Those are the only kids they took, because they were trying to, kill the Indian and keep the child.
So we had this huge commission in Canada called the Truth and Reconciliation. It ran between 2008 and 2015. But just last year, there was, I'm not going to say a discovery, because I'm pretty sure we all knew that the graves were there, but it was a recovery. There was an actual, scientifically, they went to the grounds of the residential school system, and they found all these graves. But the finding of the graves was very important for the Indigenous community, because I understand that it gave legitimacy to all these. I don't want to use the word stories, because that sort of implies some imagination.
Right.
It's true.
A lot of our ancestors, their journey ended at those schools. And now there's proof. You can tell your story and people will go, well, prove it. Prove it. What's the proof you have that this happened to your ancestors? Well, now here's the proof. There's proof that at least 215 children ended their journey at that school. Their journey ended. They passed over into the spirit world at that school. Now, does that mean that their journey would have ended at the same time if they had lived in their community? Maybe they died of an illness, and that was just the way that they left this world. But maybe not. And that's just the ones that got buried. We know from stories of people who have attended those schools that not everyone was buried. I think this just solidified. This said, Canada, this isn't just made up story. This is not just Indigenous people saying we were mistreated. This is more than that, and here's proof. Because a lot of people, can believe without seeing, but a lot of people are seeing as believing. I think that just kind of woke up the non-Indigenous community to what in residential school survivors have been saying for decades.
This discovery, this unearthing, this finding of these graves hit the news, and there was this need. I immediately thought, well, those children need quilts, and you actually did something about that. Tell me about how it started.
Well, it was about a month after the Kamloops had disclosed about their unmarked graves and gave it international news. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to do something. I have to do something. As an Indigenous mother, because I have 5 kids, I can't imagine someone just coming in my home, taking them and telling them that they can better educate them than I can. Knowing that my grandfather was hidden in the bush with his siblings, so he would never have to attend. And I've heard many stories before that about it. And I just thought, this bothers me. This hurts my spirit, hearing about these children that just never made it home. And they're probably been there for decades. Those parents probably passed over not knowing what happened to their child. I thought, I don't know, how can you live with that, not knowing what happened to your child, where your child is, what happened to them, and no one explaining it to you. So I just thought, if this hurt me, and I didn't even attend residential school. I grew up in a very, very good home. I just thought, oh my gosh, what are those? Those are people's classmates. Those are their brothers, their sisters, their cousins. How do they feel? I just thought of all the pain that must bring up for these survivors who've already suffered enough, and now they have to live with this too. This added to all the tragedy they've already suffered. So I thought, well, what can I do? And I'm standing in my living room, just kind of like, what can I do? There's people doing walks, there's people canoeing, they're fundraising, they're doing all kinds of things to spread the word about residential schools and about truth and reconciliation. And I'm like, I can't do that. I've got a job, I've got kids. I thought, I can quilt. And I felt like the creator was just there with me saying, you quilt, use your gift to bring comfort. So then I was talking to my mom and my kids and my friend, and I'm like, okay, so how many quilts do you think we can make? What are we going to do? So I thought, well, let's make some blocks. I'll just ask people for one block. If a few people send me blocks, I'll sew them together, I'll make quilts. So I went on some Facebook groups and other quilting sites that I'm on, and I asked people for blocks. And I said, I just want one 16.5-inch block, any color, any pattern, any style, maybe include some orange because that's the Every Child Matters color. And I thought, let's try this. And I asked for 215 blocks plus one to honor those first graves that were discovered. And I thought it'll make 18 quilts. That's why we needed the extra one. And we'll just send them to First Nation communities, and they can use them to honor their survivors. If they want to give it to someone, or they want to hang it up, or however they choose to honor their survivors. That was my original plan. We started it on June 26th, and we had hit 18 by the middle of July. So I was like, now what do I do? There's so many people who want to get involved. What do I do now? And then it just snowballed. And then, well, here we are. We're now a nonprofit organization now. We've sent out over 1,600 quilts to survivors all across Canada and into the U.S. And the U.S. did have a few schools as well. But it just became this huge, tangible way to bring about truth and reconciliation and to bring healing for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
So you started a Facebook group?
Yes.
You've got thousands of subscribers.
Oh, I think we're almost at 7,000 people on there, and they're survivors, and they're also just quilters, or they're people just interested in what we're doing. We're not a political site. We're just about making quilts for survivors. We now offer teaching classes as well over Zoom. So we teach a class about once a month or so. We teach a block. We make a quilt together. We allow survivors to come. It's a safe environment where they can share their stories if they wish. And the nice thing about Facebook is if it brings a lot of trauma to maybe another survivor hearing someone's story, they can just scroll by and they can still just look at the quilts and enjoy seeing how things are created. We've received donations from all over the world for this project. I'm in my office at the studio. We have a space in Timmins that was donated to us where we can come and sew and just work and enjoy the creative process of quilting.
So when you started, you were just in your home, you were working full days. When did it get to the point where you had to ask for help from other people?
I think we started out pretty quick, just because after people were sending donations, and I had only said, just send me one block, just one. I only need one block. Well, as you know, quilters, we have lots of blocks just sitting around doing nothing. They're just our sample blocks, or, we made a couple and never finished that project. So we were getting enormous amounts of donations, so much so that my delivery guys were going, okay, what are you doing? You get a lot of boxes. What are you up to? And then now when I walk in the post office, quilting lady, she's here. How many quilts you got for us today? So they know. And it just grew. And I had the lady who made my Facebook group. She volunteered, and then her sister volunteered, and then someone at Fabricland heard about us, and then she volunteered. Well, she made blocks, and then she goes, well, I have a few hours. Can I stay and help? Sure. Well, she's still here. And that was back in July. And then just through word of mouth, someone else heard about us, and then someone else heard from someone else, and then we've had guilds that have, hey, we want to make some quilts. Or I had one guild in Southern Ontario just emailed me and said, we have 23 quilts ready to go. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So once you get the word, it spreads like wildfire, because we've received donations from as far away as Norway and Australia. So word just spread very quickly. And quilters love other quilters. We will find quilters to talk about and show our stuff off. And it's just an amazing, amazing community.
So I think when I first contacted you with Gwen for the Toronto Modern Guild back in, I think we were talking last November, you got back to us right away. I was just amazed at how much you took on so quickly. Now, at that point, you were looking for a space, and I think you were hoping to get a long arm.
Like our goal back when we were just domestic quilting them, was 2 quilts a week. Well, now we're at maybe we do 8 to 10 a week, because now we have a long arm. So in January, with the help of donations, we were able to purchase a 10-foot frame, a long arm frame, and now we can do, it's much faster. Oh my gosh, there's a huge learning curve, but so much better, and the quilts look a lot nicer. I'm a little more proud of them because they just look better than what I could have done. And they don't, the backing doesn't get all stuck in your, how many times have I ripped out a quilt because I messed it up a little bit? Many, many times. And this is it's a lot more fun. And we still have about 20 local volunteers that come. Some come every week. Some come, once a month. Some come when they can. And it's just amazing. We've really built a little family here now, quilters. A lot of them came to us and knew how to use the machine. Some of them didn't even know how to sew. And now they're making quilts for their own families. It's been neat.
So are you working in this Quilts for Survivors full time now?
Obviously, I've been working full time since I started, or even more than that. But we've had enough donations that I'm able to get paid. So that's really exciting. We kind of worked up to that as donations came in, that it was like, okay, we're going to pay you for 10 hours. Now we're going to pay you for 15 hours. And I have a really great board, and they're very active in helping me find sponsors and donors and things like that. I was a bookkeeper when I started this project, and I worked full time as a bookkeeper, and that slowly has been dwindling away. But my boss is amazing, and if I needed to be here, she's like, go. So now I still work as a bookkeeper. I do about 10 hours a week, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10 hours. I work for one of our clients, and then I'm here the rest of the time. So that's really fun and it's exciting. And it gives me a little bit more flexibility, because I do have young children, and it gives me a little bit more time to spend with them and time to create and be here and have the volunteers come in a little bit more. We were just 1 day a week. We were just Wednesdays, and then we had some ladies who work, and they're like, well, we can't, take the day off, every Wednesday off to come here. So we opened up Tuesday evenings, and now we're open Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, some Saturdays. Again, it depends on my kids and their schedule. But when they're with their dad, I usually come a little bit more, try to keep it open a bit more. And I have older kids who are tremendous. If they're not here helping in the studio, they're at home taking care of things that need to be done over there.
I was going to ask, have your children become quilters too?
Well, the oldest, Catherine, she is a quilter. She has made quilts for her friends, and now she's making quilts for friends who are having babies, and she's really enjoying it. She doesn't like all the parts of quilting, but she definitely loves the piecing and making the tops. And then Michael, unfortunately, my second oldest, he just moved back to Timmins. Him and his fiance were in Ottawa going to school. So he, participated as much as he could from where he was. And then my middle son, Kendrick, he comes and takes care of our fabric room and takes care of my house because he's still living at home. So he does a lot of the cleaning and stuff like that for me.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that background work that needs to be done. You know, groceries still need to be bought, clothing still needs to be washed.
Yeah, exactly.
Kids still need to get to school.
Yeah. So then that's what he does. And then Wallace is 6 and Jose, well, she'll be 5 at the end of the month. And they can't wait until they're old enough to use the sewing machine. All they want to do is come here and help. And Jojo, you know, when she comes in, she's like, so you got any horsey fabric? She's obsessed with horses. And when we were working out of the home, they were troopers. They didn't complain. They did question all the boxes in the storage and why is all this stuff here, Mom? They've embraced the project and what we're doing, and they think it's just wonderful. And they tell everyone because you know they write those little things about what does your parent do? My mom works with fabric and makes clothes.
I'm sure there's an awful lot of administration that you've got to do for this. You've got labels that have to be sent out. You've got to organize the survivor lists. Actually, how did you find their survivors?
They found me.
Okay.
Literally, they found us. So there's Facebook groups that are for survivors of residential school, and I went on there. So I joined them. I put a post out saying, you know what, we're making quilts. If you'd like one, you can have one. And people were messaging me back and going, what do you mean we can have a quilt? You're just going to give us a quilt? Yeah. If you're a survivor of residential school or 60s group or day school or foster care system or even any traumatic event, we'll give you a quilt. We'll make you one. We'll get you one. Now, it might take 6 to 8 months to get said quilt, but we'll get it to you. So that's how it first started, was people would just message me. So then, then Jane Doe got her quilt. Well, her 5 friends now want a quilt. So then she'd give me her 5 friends' names, and then her friends knew 5 people, and that's kind of how it grew. And then when we became a nonprofit, I soon realized that getting emails and text messages and messages on over Facebook, it was hard to keep track of who I called, whose name I put on the list. I was forgetting people, or it was very overwhelming because I was using too many platforms to get all this information. So then I had a volunteer create a website, and I said, the main thing that I need is some kind of a spreadsheet, some kind of a way that people can submit their information where there's no typos and it's accurate, and I can just access it. So now we have this great system where you go to the website, you click request a quilt, you fill it out, and then once you're done, it comes to me. It goes right directly on my spreadsheet. So nobody's missed, nobody's information is lost somewhere in cyberspace. It's been working really well. So that makes a big difference, and now people know. And we've done several interviews through all different kinds of media platforms, and that has helped as well. Because every time we do an interview or there's a write-up about us in a paper somewhere, we get even more. We get an influx of requests. So that's always. So they just found us. So my goal was to send them to the First Nation communities, and I think we sent 4 or 5, maybe, because then it was like, well, we'll just, if you request one, we'll send it to you. So then the names just started flowing. And
I just checked in with your website a couple of weeks ago, and you've got a beautiful update there. Very easy to donate, very easy to sign up, very easy to contribute. Is that new update that you were talking about?
Yes. So that was all done by this wonderful guy, Keith, out of North Bay. He volunteered. He just did it. I had one of my bookkeeping clients and gotten us our domain name, which is, there's a big process just to create a website, right? And then he went in and he asked me, what do you want? And I said, here are key points that I want on my website. And then he just went with it. And he goes, how's this? And there wasn't much critiquing that I had to do. I think it looks really great. It's very vibrant. It's fun. I think it's easy to remember. So hearing you say that, Karen, is awesome. And it's really easy. Just go there, click on request a quilt, and then you just fill out the form, and you can do that as many times as you want, and for as many people as you know who would like a quilt.
So when did you expand it to not just survivors, but of the residential school systems, but just survivors of trauma?
We're federally incorporated, so when we filled those forms out, we had to specify what our mission was. When I was filling it out with the 2 ladies, my coworker and my boss, I was like, well, what do we put there? How do we word it? Because we didn't want it to be too specific, because we knew from another person in our field that if you're too specific, it's hard to become a registered charity. But you don't want to be too broad either. So that's where we said we're going to make quilts focusing on Indigenous people, but making quilts for anyone who's suffered trauma. We've been focusing on residential school survivors simply because that's what's in the news, and it's long overdue, in my opinion. And then we had other people come on and say, hey, I didn't go to residential school, but I went to day school. Can I get a quilt? And I'm like, sure. And then someone goes, well, I was 60 scoop. And, you hear of those stories of how they were just put in foster care and raised by a non-Indigenous family. And some maybe had a good time, some not so great. If you want to request a quilt, go for it. And then I had a young man, but he goes, I've been in foster care since I was just a little guy. Most of my life I was raised by non-Indigenous people in the foster care system. Can I get a quilt? I said, well, yeah, you survived foster care. That's pretty traumatic. There was also a lady had messaged me about a family who had lost loved ones due to a hunting accident. She goes, can they get a quilt? I said, yes. I said, but you have to fill it out, and when their name comes up, then they get the quilt. I said, and be very specific, because there's a place where you can write the survivor's story. Well, write what they survived. There's lots of trauma out there. There's lots of things that we wish never happened to our loved ones, but we can't take away their pain, but we can definitely, make the journey going forward a lot better.
So why are blankets so important within the Indigenous community?
I think it's because they're made by us. They're made with our blood, sweat, and tears sometimes. And we put a big piece of ourselves into those quilts. And I know not quilting per se, but blanket giving was always something that we did. We would have blanket ceremonies. Now we use them in my First Nation community, Missanabie First. We use them to honor people, whether it's graduates or members who have done something wonderful for the community or for something great that they've achieved. And people come into our community, we've always honored them with blankets, whether they were handmade or bought, just as a symbol of us respecting their journey and what they've accomplished in their life. Just a sign of respect and honoring their journey, whatever it was. And I think that's the importance, and that it's maybe when I'm making the quilt or when someone else is making a quilt, they don't know exactly where it's going, but they know who it's going to, or maybe not the person's name, but they know that you've suffered. I want you to not feel so hurt by that. I want you to get some comfort and know that people care and that you're not alone. And when you grab a quilt and someone's made this, someone took the hours and the time to make this quilt for you, not even knowing who you are. So one survivor said, to have strangers make something so beautiful for me is very overwhelming. And she says, for us. They didn't have much at school. They had very little when they left their homes. And so their Christmases weren't the same, their birthdays weren't celebrated. They weren't given a name, they were given a number. So their whole identity had been lost. And having that quilt that's now theirs, that was made for them. One gentleman said when our package came to him, his first package he ever received in his whole life, and he was in his 70s. He says, I've never received anything. He says, and to receive a quilt was quite a blessing for him.
So I'm sure there's people listening. Like when I heard you talk, Gwen and I got together, and our guild has formed a group making blankets for survivors. And you're aware of the group that we approached here in Toronto. If somebody else is listening and they want to start an initiative within their own quilting community, what are the steps that you would advise them to take in approaching their local band, or how get in contact with somebody who might know how to find these survivors?
Well, I would say first contact myself, just because we do have a huge list. We have over 900 names, and that grows every day. We send out 5 quilts, we get 10 more names. So you just contact me, let me know what area you're in, because there are some guilds, like you had mentioned, that are making quilts for specific First Nations, or there's a guild on a First Nation that's making quilts. There's lots of people already doing things within the country. There's longarmers out there who are quilting for free if you bring all the supplies. So there's lots of people out there. If you're maybe not part of a guild or part of a sewing group, there's probably someone in your area that's already working on something. So if you contact me, we can get you connected with other people. If you want to approach a First Nation, I usually send a letter and letting them know what the project is, who I am, just explaining the process, and if they would like us to make them quilts. Because not everyone's ready, not everyone is at the same place on their journey. So it's best to always contact the First Nation first and let them know this is what we would like to do. Would you allow us to do that? Some of them will come back. I had one First Nation say, we have 85 living survivors. Can you send us 85 quilts? Yes, I can. And then we obviously ask them for their name, but because of privacy things, oftentimes it'll be one address. You just send it to the band office, and, the lady there will, coordinate delivering them. There was a group of elders in Calgary where someone had contacted me and said, we're having this elders meeting. Can you make us 40 quilts? Yeah, when is it? And I think we had like a month. So I went on the Facebook group and I said, we need 40 quilts for Calgary. The next 40 people who ask for a name, your quilts are all going to Calgary. And, things like that. But definitely just check in, because of course we want to make sure everyone gets a quilt. There's about 10,000 living survivors. And we want to make sure everyone gets a quilt. We don't want to forget anyone, and we don't want to burden someone with two and then them having to find someone to give the quilt to. We want to make sure everyone gets one for sure.
Now, there's a couple of do's and don'ts that you have. What are the do's and what are the don'ts?
The do's are have fun, enjoy, be as creative as you want. We ask that they're at least 48 by 64 in size. They can be as big as you dare make it. And then for the don'ts, we ask, and this is coming directly from survivors, because when we first started, we had nothing. But then survivors had said, so no travel-related fabrics, so no cars, planes, trains, nothing with, road signs or things like that. And then no school-related fabric, which is, it makes sense when you think about it. And then no religious fabric, because we all have our own religious views, and we don't want to re-traumatize someone by instilling our religious views onto them, especially in a gift that's for them. So those are the three, and those have come directly from our survivors, and we want to honor that request. So anything goes. We encourage people to use orange. When we first started, people were like, orange in a quilt? It's not a color I normally go to. Some people love the color orange, and it's their go-to color, as you can see in your beautiful quilt. But anything goes, any pattern, any style. There's no right or wrong. I'm sure if it's made with love, that's all that matters. I've had people who say, my flimsy, my top, doesn't have any orange in it. Well, why don't you bind it in orange? Why don't you quilt it in orange? It's not a requirement. It's just, it honors that every child matters movement that has been around for quite some time. And the lady who founded that movement has received her quilt. And they actually have publicly said that they support our project. So that is such a blessing as well, to have them, share about what we're doing. But when it comes to patterns and just do whatever your heart desires. If you go on our Facebook, there's tons, and they're all different. Different. We do ask
it's amazing.
A good quality material. When we ask for donations, we ask that it's 100% cotton quilting fabric, because we don't want the stuff you make clothes with. We don't want used clothes and things like that. These survivors have been given many used clothes. The schools didn't give them nice quality things. So we want to make sure that these quilts are good quality, that they'll last, because a lot of them have said they're going to keep them as a family heirloom. This one gentleman said he put his quilt up on the wall, and I said, oh, you're supposed to use it. It's a quilt, it's a blanket. He said, no, it's going on the wall, and when I pass, he said, it's going to the youngest grandchild, my youngest grandchild. And he says, hopefully it'll get passed on through generations. I thought, oh wow, he's already plotting for what he's doing with his quilt once it's done. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been lovely talking to you. If people want to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, you can find me on Facebook. So it's Quilts for Survivors. We have a page and we have a group. And then our website is also www.quiltsforsurvivors.ca. All my contact information is there, my email and my cell phone number.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Karen.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Vanessa Genier. This is a challenging subject, as all Canadians need to reconcile our part in how we let this happen, and how we can best support Indigenous communities as they move forward. September 30th is our National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. I am honored that my quilt will play a small part. If you too want to contribute, I'll leave a link in the notes for the Quilts for Survivors Facebook page and website. You can donate a block, a quilt, fabric, batting, or money, all will be appreciated. Next up on Karen's Quilt Circle is Kelly Kaczmarek of Silly Moon Quilting, and we will be talking about ruler work, both on the domestic sewing machine and the long arm. You don't want to miss it, so be sure to subscribe. Next time you're in your sewing room, be sure to have Karen's Quilt Circle playing in the background. I have interviewed so many amazing people on this show. Let one inspire you. And check out my last video on my top 10 favorite quilting tools. Take care, and I'll see you next time.